My presentation will be just an introduction to the history of the Holocaust, but as an introduction of the introduction, I would like to say only some words on my work, on my background. I am officially a senior research fellow at the Institute of History of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and this is my first workplace because I graduated at that time the Karl Marx University of Economics 1983, and after graduation I received a position at the Institute of History, and I remained there, and my research field is the Second World War related forced migrations. Why I am here in the United States? I am here because I would like to stay. I would like to be here in the United States. This is not my first time here. At first time I was here in 1995, when I had an opportunity to stay here for a longer time with my family. That was 10 months period of time. I was here with my family because I received a grant. I applied and I was happy to receive a grant from the Holocaust Memorial Museum. And after this grant, I returned to attend various conferences. But I always wanted to return for a longer time here. And 2 years ago I applied for a Fulbright grant. I was happy and I was proud to get the grant, and this grant gave me an opportunity to return, and I have a teaching duty at the Nazareth College, and I also do research work with one of my colleagues there, with Dr. George Eisen, who is my host at the Nazareth College. I will speak on the Holocaust, but I would like to put the Holocaust in a historical context. And I will speak in a bit more detailed way in the Holocaust only probably in the last 10 minutes of my presentation, because I think that it is very important to know the prehistory of the Holocaust. It's very important to know the background of the story, even if I do not think that I tell you this is truth. Maybe it is not the truth. I will tell you what I think on the Holocaust, on the circumstances, on the historical context, on the basis what I read on the Holocaust, what I read on the history of the 20th century, on the basis of the research work I did. I have an Eastern European perspective because I am from Hungary. And this Eastern European perspective is different a bit from the American perspective. It is different from a Western, it is different from a German perspective. I am impressed very much here in the United States when I experience that there is a great interest here in the history of the Holocaust. And when I mentioned it to my colleagues at the Nazareth College or in other communities that I deal with the history of the Holocaust, that everybody was impressed that really you deal with the Holocaust. That's fantastic. That's a great thing, and everybody was impressed, and I was impressed because they were impressed. But that kind of attitude towards the Holocaust, what I experience here in the United States, that's a bit unique for me. That's unique for me because in Hungary, and I think that we can experience the same in other Eastern European countries, in Hungary the Holocaust is important issue, of course. It is important issue, but it does not stir up emotions in Hungary. I couldn't say that Hungarians are not really interested in the Holocaust, but it is not really an issue. It is not really an issue in the Hungarian public life. And there must be two factors, I think, of that kind of Hungarian attitude. Yes, we can speak that there is anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe, and this is one of the factors that probably Hungarians or Romanians or Poles or Slovaks or Czech, etc., they are anti-Semitic a bit, to a certain extent. They are anti-Semitic a bit, and this is why they are not really interested in the Holocaust. That could be a viewpoint. However, the level of anti-Semitism is regularly measured in a way. Of course, it is almost impossible to measure, but colleagues, sociologists, try to measure the level of anti-Semitism, and they use the same criteria everywhere in Europe, and according to these measures, the level of anti-Semitism in Hungary must be about the same as in Austria or in France. So Hungary is not more anti-Semitic than other countries in the region, as I know, at least as I know. But there is another factor, and this factor is worth to speak about it in a much more detailed way, that in Hungary, and this is the situation everywhere in Eastern Europe, the Holocaust was not the only tragedy, and there were other victims groups. I dealt with the human losses of Hungary during the Second World War. That was my PhD thesis, human losses of Hungary during the Second World War. And my conclusion was that about 60% of the losses of Hungary was due to the Holocaust. So, but 40% of Hungarian losses were due to other factors, to the Soviet forced labor and to the military operations. So what I would like to emphasize, that in Hungary there are other victims groups. During the Second World War and in the early post-war period, the ethnic structure of whole Eastern Europe and East Central Europe dramatically changed. About 18 million ethnic Germans were resettled, were removed from their homeland, from Poland, from Czechoslovakia, also from Hungary, from Yugoslavia, from Romania, and they were resettled mainly to the western part of Germany, to the Anglo-Saxon region of Germany, and that part which was occupied by the Anglo-Saxon powers and France. There were various forms of forced migrations during the war years and in the early post-war period. Poles were expelled from the western part of the Soviet Union to the Polish territories. Ukrainians were expelled from Poland to the Soviet Union. Slovaks had to leave their homeland from Carpathia and they moved to Czechoslovakia. Ukrainians moved to the Soviet Union. Hungarians were expelled in the neighborhood countries. After the Second World War, more than 300,000 Hungarians moved to the present-day territory of Hungary from Romania, from Czechoslovakia, from Yugoslavia. There was a huge turmoil after the Second World War. It is important because I would like to emphasize, I would like to explain that there were many victim groups in Hungary and also in other Eastern European countries. And another victim group is the group of Hungarian prisoners of war and civilian internees who ended the Second World War in Soviet custody. About 600,000 Hungarians became forced laborers in the Soviet Union. About 2/3 of them were soldiers who became prisoners of war at the end of the Second World War, but most of them did not even fight against the Soviets. But in Hungarian territories and outside Hungary, the Soviet army also so-called mobilized, collected and deported a significant proportion of civilians, mainly males, who could work because the Soviet Union was in need of workforce, and Hungarians, Germans, even Romanians, Poles were deported to the Soviet Union, even if they were not soldiers, and they had to work in various Soviet forced labor camps for years. So when we speak on various victim groups, we have to speak, first of all, on the Jewish community, but we have to speak also on ethnic Germans who were resettled. They were not killed, they were not exterminated, but they were removed from their homeland. Hungarians were also removed. Ukrainians, Poles, Romanians were removed from their homeland, and they became alien in another country. The fate of Hungarian and other forced laborers who had to spend years in the Soviet Union, and about 1/3 of Hungarian forced laborers died or perished in the Soviet Union. So this is why when we are speaking on the Holocaust in Hungary, of course we also have to speak or to mention that there were other tragedies. This is why in Hungary we have 2 memorial days. We have one memorial day for the victims of the Holocaust. We have another memorial day for the victims of the communist dictatorship. What I was thinking is that maybe there is somehow a link among these tragedies, the tragedies of the Jewish community, the drama of various ethnic groups in the region who were uprooted and transferred to other regions, and the fate of forced laborers. Because East Central European region were hit by these various tragedies. And I think that maybe there is a link among these tragedies. In order to make a long story short, I simplify this story. But what I think, that since the mid-19th century, there were historians, politicians, sociologists, even theologians who were thinking of which would be the most human society, how to make the world better. Scholars were thinking, how can we establish or build up new societies, societies without exploitation? How can we create new orders of international relationship to eliminate wars? These were very important, very basic questions. And of course, there were various answers to these questions. When scholars try to reply to these challenges of humanity in general, challenges of the history of the 19th century in particular, they try to use the results of modern science, the results of biology, the results of economics, the results of history. And there were various replies. A basic question was, for example, what was the engine of the history? What will be the, or is there a destination of the history? Or what can be learned from the history? One of a decisive reply was to these questions was that the history should be considered as a history of revolutions. The history should be considered as a war between various classes. Of course, this is the Marxist reply to this question, but we have to speak on Marxism because the Marxism, the communism, had a tremendous impact on the history of the 20th century in general and on the history of Eastern Europe in particular. So the Marxist reply was to these questions that we can eliminate conflicts in the society, but we can create a new society. And in this new society, we have to eliminate each kind of every form of exploitation. Because the problem is that in the history, there were always classes which exploited the workers' class. Who were the members of the worker class? In the ancient times, the slaves. In the feudalism, the peasants. In the capitalism, the peasants and the factory workers or blue-collar workers. They were the members of the workers' class. They were exploited by the aristocrats, by the capitalists, by the business people. But at the end of this long history of exploitation, a great revolution would come, and as a consequence of this great revolution, a new society will be built up, which will be really a paradise for the mankind. There will be no exploitation, because the workers' class will defeat the capitalists, they will defeat the aristocracy, and they will build a new society for the workers. And that will be really a paradise on the earth. But it turned out that this great revolution was carried out in 1917, then the Soviet Communist Party seized power in the Soviet Union, and they established the Soviet Union, which became the first country of the workers' class. But it turned out that the Soviet Union, and as a communist dictatorship, became one of the worst, one of the most brutal dictatorships in the history of the mankind. Because what happened after the victorious revolution, they wanted to annihilate, they wanted to exterminate the unwanted classes, those who belong to the aristocracy, those who belong to the business class, those who belong to the intelligentsia. They were considered unwanted persons, unwanted classes, harmful classes. Lenin, the theoreticians of the revolution, spoke on the rulers as vermins, for example. So they use very strong expressions. And they were expelled, they were sent to forced labor camps, they were exterminated. And not only the members of the rural class, but also a significant proportion of the peasantry. I just mentioned that in the Great Famine in the early 30s, about at least 3 million peasants died because of the famine. Mm-hmm. So that was the Soviet history, but I mentioned it because hundreds of thousands of Eastern Europeans were deported after the Second World War to Soviet forced labor camps, because the forced labor became an integral part of the Soviet economic system. What about the internet? What about the solution of the great problems of international relationship? After the First World War, there was a very famous theory which was popularized by the famous American president, President Wilson, and that theory was the self-determination of nations. That was a very important and very useful and very human theory, because the message of this theory was that every nation should get a state. Every family should get a home or a house. The same theory is used for nations, that every nation should get a state. The concept was also that it would be important to partition, to break up the great empires after the end of the First World War, and to create ethnically homogeneous nation state. Because if each state has only one ethnic group, it means that there is no reason to fight against each other, because there is no real reason to fight against each other. So after the First World War, the Austria-Hungary was broken up. Russian Empire was broken up, the Turkish Empire, and on the territories of these empires, so-called ethnically homogeneous states, or if you like, nation states, were created. However, it turned out that in East Central Europe or in Eastern Europe, it is impossible to create ethnically homogeneous nation state. In this region, the theory of self-determination of nation, which is so human, but it does not work. In this region, the theory does not work, because it couldn't work, because in this theory, because in this region, there are dozens of various religious groups and ethnic groups, and it is impossible to separate these groups. What happened? On the basis of this theory, let's create ethnically homogeneous nation state. New states were created: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Baltic states. Romania was not a new state, but the territory of Romania became 3 times larger than before the Second World War. And what happened that the new states were as multi-ethnic as the Turkish Empire and the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, because it was impossible to draw boundaries along ethnic lines in these territories. It was not really a problem. The problem was that the 20th century, especially the first half of the 20th century, more especially the 20s, was the era of nationalism. And what does it mean? That the national elites everywhere in the region, the national elites wanted to create ethnically homogeneous nation states. They wanted to create it, even if they had multi-ethnic states, but they wanted to transfer these existing multi-ethnic states to an ethnically homogeneous nation states. Romanian national elite wanted only Romanians in Romanian territory. Czechoslovak national elite wanted Czechs and Slovaks. Poles wanted only Poles in Romanian territory. And what happened, I tried to simplify the situation. What happened? That in these countries, there was a policy, on one hand, forced assimilation, but on the other hand, and that happened after the Second World War, when they had opportunities, they wanted to solve the so-called ethnic question in a way that they began to deport or to eliminate, even to exterminate those groups which were considered aliens. Germans were considered aliens, Hungarians were considered aliens in Romania and in Czechoslovakia, in Yugoslavia, but Romanians were considered aliens in the western border region of the Soviet Union. So that theory was at the background of this Second World War related forced population movements. Let's create ethnically homogeneous nation state. And this is at the background of those great decisions which happened in the region after the fall of the communism, because Czechoslovakia broke up, Yugoslavia broke up, mainly according to ethnic lines, because this is the era of nationalism. Now I reach to the question of the Holocaust, because what I think that racism, it is an extreme form of nationalism. What I think that I mentioned that in Eastern Europe, the main aim, the main desire of national elites was to create ethnically homogeneous nation state. And the National Socialist movement wanted to reach the same, but they did not speak ethnically homogeneous nation state. They spoke racially homogeneous state or racially homogeneous empire. So I think there is a link between the nationalism and between the nationalist theories and nationalist policies of the whole East Central European region and the racist policy or the racial policy of Nazi Germany. I refer that when the communist idea turned up, when National Socialism turned up, these ideas were portrayed. These ideas, these ideologies turned up in the competition of various ideas as scholarly theories, as scientific theories. So it is strange to hear, but the communism was considered as a scientific ideology. In Hungary, we had to learn at the university scientific socialism, because we had to learn that the communism and the socialist theory, That's a result of the historical research, that's a result of the various researches on the field of sociology, on the field of politology, and the message of this scholarly attitude was that communism will prevail ultimately. It will be the end of the history that the communism will prevail, because it is a scientific theory. In the Soviet Union, it was compulsory to learn in the university scientific communism. But the National Socialism was also considered at that time as a scientific ideology, as a scientific theory. I just mentioned that the background of that kind of pseudo-scientific attitude was the theory of Darwin, because then Darwin spoke on the natural selection in biology. He spoke and wrote on the survival of the fittest. And these theories were applied to sociology and to politics. So Darwinism was transformed to a racist ideology. I do not mean that there is a direct link between the National Socialist theory and the Darwinism. I do not think. But I think that there is a link between the social Darwinism and the Nazi theory. The social Darwinism means when we use the rules of biology to human societies. This is what means social Darwinism. When we use the teaching of Darwin to human societies. So this is social Darwinism. Social Darwinism had a great influence on Nazi theoreticians, and social Darwinism had a great influence to Hitler. So according to the Nazi ideology, the history is the fight between various races, and this is the fight for survival. The ultimate aim of Nazi Germany was to create a racially homogeneous German empire. At first Germany, a racially homogeneous Germany, and then a racially homogeneous German empire. What does it mean? It means that in Germany there is place only for Germans. There is no place for those groups who belong to other racial groups. Who belongs to other racial groups? First of all, the Jews. The Jews, we do not need them. But we do not need the Roma community. They also belong to another racial group. We don't need them. And there are other segments of the society who were considered as alien group or unwanted group. For example, members of various Christian churches, the members of Jehovah's Witnesses, gays, lesbians were also considered as racially inferior, or the official term was asocial. So the gays and lesbians were labeled as asocials, yes. But the Nazi theoreticians thought on the larger German Empire, which included the occupied Eastern territory, the occupied territory of Poland, the occupied territory of the Soviet Union. They also wanted to create territories which are devoted only for Germans. There were many plans how to redraw the ethnic, or if you like, the racial character of the occupied Eastern territories. There were plans that after the end of the war, the Poles from Poland will be deported to the east. There were plans that Ukrainians and Russians will be deported to the Ural Mountains. There were plans that the population of the Baltic states will be deported in order to create a racially homogeneous German empire. There were many plans. Fortunately, most of these plans were not realized. About the Jewish community and about the Jewish policy, of the Nazi Empire. I would like to emphasize that maybe you think that anti-Semitism and the Nazi policy was rooted in the German mind. It was a consequence of the German history. But it was not. There are some historians, there are some scholars who advocate that idea that Nazism and anti-Semitism, it originates from the German history. But I do not think. In the First World War, Germany was very close to be to the position to be the great patron of the Jews in Eastern Europe. The Jewish community in Germany was integrated to the German society, was integrated into the German society. The Jewish community was assimilated into the German society. And I would like to repeat it again, that in the First World War, Germany was considered as a patron of various Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, and not only Germany, Hungary and Austria also. I read many newspapers, mainly Hungarian newspapers, but newspapers which were published by the Hungarian Jewish community. And I know that those Jewish newspapers which were published in Austria and Germany wrote the same things. And what was the main message of the Jewish community? And this message was published in the Hungarian newspaper, Jewish newspaper, and in various German and Austrian Jewish newspapers, that Germany and Austria-Hungary in the war, in the Great War, were fighting for the Jewish civilization. The German soldier, the Hungarian soldier, the Austrian soldier was fighting for Jewish interest, because Germany and Austria-Hungary are the great patrons of the Jewish civilization. And this attitude was not without basis. That was a very reasonable attitude. Why? Because the main enemy of Austria-Hungary and Germany was Russia. German army, a half of the German army fought against Russians. The greater part of the army of Austro-Hungarian monarchy fought on the eastern theater of war against Russia. And Russia was the most anti-Semitic power in the whole world. And the Jews was really suppressed. Russia and the western borderland of Russia was famous because of the pogroms against the Jewish population. When the German army arrived to Russian territories, the German soldiers, and that was the situation when the Hungarian and Austrian soldiers occupied the western part of Russia, these soldiers were received by the local Jewish community as liberators, because they were really liberators. And I also have to mention that what was the language of the Jews in East Central Europe? What was the language of the Jews in the western borderland of the Soviet Union? This is the land where probably the 50% of the Jewish population in the whole world lived. So that was really a very significant territory from the. It was very significant territory from the point of Jewish history. What was the language? Do you know? Yes, exactly. His language was Yiddish, but the Yiddish is a form of the German language. So
were they Ashkenazi?
Yeah, they were Ashkenazi Jews. Yes, they were Ashkenazi Jews. So they spoke German language, even if they lived in Russia. They gravitated to the German culture, to the Austrian culture. Germany was very close. So if the history stops at the end of the First World War, you can say that, you know, Germany was the German liberated, or at least tried to liberate the Jews. Germans brought liberty. Austrians brought liberty for the Jews. Germany was really the great patron of the Jews, of the Jewish civilization. Just one more addition, because it's also important. A widespread idea, or it was just more than idea, it was a widespread thought in Great Britain during the First World War, especially in 1917, the revolution, the communist revolution in Russia, which overthrew the regime of the Tsar, was a conspiracy of Germans and Jews. Actually, that was a Jewish conspiracy, but that was more than Jewish conspiracy, that was a German Jewish conspiracy. Because the Jews and the Germans always worked together. And it was not without basis, because the leaders of the Communist Party, of the Soviet Communist Party, or many of the leaders were in exile in Switzerland. And they were financed by the German Empire, and this is really a fact. And German agents have and organized the leaders of the Soviet Communist Party to move to Russia at spring 1917